Welcome to episode 45 of Curiosityness. I am Travis DeRose, the host, and on this episode I have on the father of the 401k. His name is Ted Benna. He's sort of warmed up to that title, but he doesn't super love it. But it's true, he did, create the 401k as we know it today back in 1979. So we talk about that whole story about how he kind of came up with the idea and what it was originally used for. But, I mean, just quickly, the 401k it's basically a contribution retirement plan that allows everything to happen kind of pre-tax. So we get into all this kind of stuff. And then Ted talks about why it may not necessarily be the best thing anymore and how there's kind of different structures that work better, and especially if you're a small employer. So we talk a lot about that. And it's a very, very interesting conversation. I think you're really going to appreciate it and learn a lot because everybody has retirement stuff, even self-employed and everything like myself. So I highly recommend it. We get into, it gets detailed, but Ted does a good job of doing a high-level, overview of things and keeping it understandable without getting into like the super detailed stuff. And that's it. I think you're going to like it. And I think it's a really important episode to listen to and to think about this stuff. So without further ado, here is Ted Benna, the father of the 401k. And boom, we're going. How are you doing, Ted?
Hey, Travis, I'm doing great. Nice to be with you today.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting to talk to you. You're the father of the 401k.
Hey, that's a label that they gave me some years ago. It took me a while to get used to it, but at this stage of life, I embrace it.
Right.
I recently wrote a book, actually, that I got out last fall. It's called 401k 40 Years Later. And when I was going through and finalizing that and pulled all the historical information I have there, the early articles I was able to get published and all that stuff. And, it was definitely a reminder of the fact that, the reality is that I put this thing on the map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you got to face it. You're the father of the 401k, right, Ted?
I guess so.
But sounds like you don't have a bumper sticker that says I'm the father of the 401k or anything, huh?
I definitely do not.
Well, maybe we should look into that. Maybe someone will send you something.
Yeah, well, the closest I got to that was actually when we originally got this going. One of the things we checked legally was to see whether we could copyright or patent it, and we were told we couldn't. So what we did was we came up with a name that we used to disguise what we were doing, using smoke and mirrors. We called it CASHOP, CASH-OP. And so some of the early articles we got published didn't say anything about 401k. It used that name. And, the reason I'm bringing it up is our finance guy did bless me at one point with a license plate that had that on it. And, that was kind of had an interesting story or two, that went with it.
Right. Well, that's kind of cool. So why was it? Where did that name come from?
Well, there's something called ESOP and employee stock ownership, and there were some other. So 401k technically is a cash or deferred plan. Uh-huh. So we just piggyback off that to, you call it cash op for cash option.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay, man. Well, cool. I mean, yeah, let's get into it because your book is, very interesting. 40 years later, how, you kind of talk about how you came up with it and the whole thing like that. So I definitely want to hear that story, even though I'm sure you've told it 100 times. And then, we'll kind of get into how other companies started using it and how you think people should use it and everything like that. But, let's just start. Can you bring us back to, the day you kind of started, figuring this out in your mind in 1979 and how it all started?
Sure, I'd be glad to. What got me involved in putting the pieces together was I was working on an assignment for one of our bank clients. And, that's when my creative juices get flowing, is when I have an actual project that I've been hired, by a client to come up with an answer. And, they wanted to restructure the retirement program, and without getting too deeply engaged in that, as I was working on what they wanted to accomplish, I knew this section of the law, which had been passed in 1978, would provide a vehicle for them to do that. But key to making it work was that we needed to get sufficient level of participation from the lower two-thirds paid of the bank employees, Travis. And, and I knew when working with other banks that a tax break wasn't going to be enough to do that. So that was when I did something that no one had ever thought of before, and that was linking a matching employer contribution to this section of the tax law, 401k. There wasn't anything in the law that said you could. There also wasn't anything saying that, thou shalt not. So the idea here was that I felt that when we went to the lower paid employees at the bank and said, by doing this, you're going to get a dual incentive. You're going to get a tax break, plus you're going to get some additional money from the bank via matching contribution. I thought there's a pretty good chance that we would get this thing to work. And once I linked those two pieces, it became obvious to me immediately that this thing had tremendous potential. And the reason for that was that most of the larger companies around the country, the IBMs, the General Motors, et cetera, already had in place matching savings plans where employees were able to put their money in after tax, and they got a match from their employers. Mm-hmm. And I realized all of a sudden here, we had the opportunity to go out and approach them and say, hey, how'd you like to start putting your money into this savings plan pre-tax rather than after tax? It didn't take long for me to realize that this thing had tremendous potential.
Okay, so that's really the main benefit that you found was that they were able to match the savings, but do it pre-tax, correct?
Absolutely. And then the other part that occurred to me at that time was the possibility that employees would be able to put money into this type of plan pre-tax themselves. And there wasn't anything in the law saying that you could do that. This section was added legally to the IRS Code strictly for employer-funded plans. And so, the idea of employees being able to also participate in this thing by making contributions on their own, was certainly a totally new idea as well.
Okay, so I mean, is that what the 401k was originally written for? It was like, why was it originally kind of added to the tax code, I guess?
It was added without going into the detailed history to provide specific rules for operating employer-funded cash-deferred profit-sharing plans. Those plans had been in limbo for quite a few years as a result of an announcement Treasury had made, back in 1972 that they weren't sure, they liked these plans anymore. And so their future was in doubt all the way from 72 to 1978.
Okay, so I kind of see that. And then you were the one who came along and then said, well, hey, maybe we can use it this way for employers to put money in, but there's nothing to say you could do it necessarily, but nothing to say you couldn't either. So let's do it and let's try it.
Yeah, and so the main thing here that's important for people to know is that 401k, obviously, as we're aware of today, is a household name. I mean, you pick up books. I mean, whatever you read, you see 401k mentioned all over the place. And,
mm-hmm.
It was totally unknown, back at that time. And it was never intended to be the big thing that it is today. So politically, it's a fluke. It was never put in law to turn the retirement world upside down. I mean, that's the probably the most bizarre thing, from a political point of view. It's now the backbone of the private retirement system, the way that most people were going to save for retirement. And, over the last 40 years, it's helped accumulate probably somewhere around $15 trillion. I mean, an astounding amount of money.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So when you figured this out, was the IRS or the government like, hey, no, wait a minute, that's not what you're supposed to do here? Or were they kind of like on board with it?
Travis, that's a really fantastic question, because my senior partner Ed Johnson was concerned that once this thing starts to get publicized, certainly Treasury Department reads for articles pointing to tax breaks, that they hadn't anticipated. And so he was concerned that, once that started to happen, that they might shut this thing down. So we were fortunate. This was when Ronald Reagan had just been elected, and one of his cabinet members was a client and a friend of ours. So we approached him and presented this, and he quickly said, "Well, what do you guys want?" We said, "Hey, look, introduce us over to the Treasury officials who are working on this thing." That gave me the opportunity to talk with the guy at Treasury who was responsible for the regulations that were really going to govern the future of these plans. And, I had an opportunity to tell him what we were doing, have a meaningful discussion about this with him. And I was pretty confident that the matching contribution was going to be okay. Mm-hmm. The biggest doubt I had was whether the regulations would allow employees to make pre-tax contributions themselves. And, I had a discussion with him about the fact that if they didn't allow that, it was going to be very difficult administratively for Treasury to enforce the regulations otherwise, without, getting buried into the details of this. But, the reality is, we were anxious about it until months later, the proposed regulations came out and, supported both of these, and, kind of cleared the way for the future then.
Okay. Awesome. So you were very cautious and upfront about what you were doing, and kind of getting the okay before you really implemented it, huh?
Well, he frankly, he didn't give me any insight into whether what we were doing was going to be okay or not. I mean, we were flying on our own. And so, when we got out there and started talking to major employers, like Bethlehem Steel and J.C. Penney and, and others, some were ready to start moving ahead. Others definitely were cautious and said, hey, look, we need to wait until we see some regulations whether this thing's going to be allowed or not. And, the technical issue that people don't know, Travis, in terms of the employee contribution, is that actually when employees sign up to put money into a 401k plan themselves, they are legally authorizing their employers to reduce their salary. It's called a salary reduction. Mm-hmm. And then the employer makes that contribution to plan as an employer contribution. Is technically, legally how it works. Oh. And, some of the early articles, one in the Wall Street Journal, for example, mentioned, how would you like to take a salary reduction? Because that's what you do when you sign up to make employee contributions to a 401k.
Yeah. It's all about how you frame it and pitch it to people, huh?
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, man, very interesting. So yeah, I'm definitely getting, as a layperson here, I'm not, I have an understanding of this stuff, on the surface level, but yeah, I'm getting the story here. So you're very good at describing it. So I appreciate that. And I think people listening are on board and kind of get, how you figure this out and everything. Does this happen often? This kind of, maybe little creative, changing or loophole almost of a tax code, and then it becoming so widespread and used in so many companies?
There are a number of instances where I've had that opportunity actually during my career. Um, one of them was long before the 401k thing, and a couple of others were actually after 401k. Where I was able to look in when there were new tax laws to kind of get some insight into, hey, where might there be opportunities here that are generally being overlooked. So it isn't necessarily unusual.
Okay. It's just yeah, it's just now that 401k is just such a household name, like you said. So it is quite fun to call you the father of the 401k, right?
I guess it is,
Right.
Travis.
Okay, so now we have, you guys have implemented this, and you're kind of showing companies that it's working, and the new regulations have come out and everything, and so now more and more companies start implementing it. And are you helping them with that?
Sure, that's basically what our business was at that point in time, was providing technical advice to help them understand how to do it. Exactly.
Okay. Um, and then so that's happening, but then I'm not sure when this happened in the timeline, but eventually you said that you basically wanted to kind of blow up the existing 401k investment structure for something kind of different, right?
Yeah, that was a few years ago, probably about maybe somewhere in that range, 4 or 5 years.
Okay. So why is that? What has changed? Why do you want to kind of change it up now?
The reason for that is because it became much too expensive for participants. We go back to the early days. In the beginning, Travis, the way this was structured. Well, let me just talk before we get into the expenses. Let me just talk about the investment structure itself, and then we can get into the fee issue.
Mm-hmm.
The early plans, participants had two investment choices, if you can believe that. One was a fixed guaranteed type of investment, and the other would have been an equity mutual fund.
Mm-hmm.
And you split your contributions in 25% multiples. So there are only five possibilities, ranging from zero, 100% to zero, 75, 25, 50, 50, 25, 75, or zero, 100%, split between those two options. That
Okay.
was, all the choices you had. It was very simple and easy for participants to understand. In fact, it probably took about 2 minutes for me to explain their investment options. It wasn't hard at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, but also in the beginning, was all of the fees were paid by the employer except the basic investment fee. The administration, the record keeping, legal, auditing fees, all of them. And so, what I've covered in the book in detail is the history of what happened to the fees over the years. And, getting into that, it's the picture isn't pretty, Travis. What happened is eventually, and I guess this would have been probably around the early '80s. The investment community started to become aware of the fact that, wow, I mean, there's significant money going into these plans, chance to make some real money. And the 401k turned the mutual fund industry into what it is today completely. Before 401k, it was pretty much small mom and pop type operations. You had Vanguard, you had Fidelity, Dreyfus, American funds, probably about a half a dozen or so name brand fund families that, they just weren't that big, at that point in time. And today, I mean, in the whole industry, I mean, it's just a monster industry.
Yeah.
So what happened is that we got to what became bundled arrangements that were offered by the mutual fund companies, the insurance companies, et cetera. And The reality, frankly, is what got bundled were the fees. So I identified in the book, one of the Fortune 500 companies as an example that, I interviewed when this happened. And, they moved their investments to one of the leading mutual fund companies at that time. And the cost of the participants went from around, 0.10 to 0.12% to 1%, almost, basically about 10 times increase in fees. Mm-hmm. And in that process, the employer was able to eliminate about $100,000 of record-keeping fees that they were paying themselves, and that got picked up now by the mutual fund company. So at the time, the HR director told me he was being pressured to reduce fees, and this was an easy way to accomplish that, was to pass this thing off to the mutual fund company. And I remember at the time discussing this with the mutual fund company and said, look, why don't you guys give 401k participants a break? Because your pricing structure now is based on individuals coming in and buying your shares where they're investing, a few $1,000s, 5,000, 10,000, whatever. You got somebody now that's giving you $100 million,
Yeah.
The fees ought to be a lot less.
Right.
And they told us, well, we have to treat all our buyers the same. We can't have different fee structures. And what's funny about that today, if you take a mutual fund company like, take American Funds as an example, some of their funds have, 10, 12 different classes with different fee structures. Mm-hmm. The participants and buyers of those funds don't have a clue what they're buying, what they're paying. I mean, it's become so complicated and convoluted. So that was the first step. Then it got worse, unfortunately. And when it got worse was when the investment advice got added in. Investment advice, managed accounts. And, what happened here is it became clear that trying to, let me back up a minute. What happened, I have to add this first, was we evolved from 2 funds with 25% multiples. We gradually moved to 3 funds, 5 funds, 10, 12, 15, maybe 20 funds being offered to participants.
Wow.
So what happened then is the splits got reduced to 1% multiples from 25. So what that meant is participants had literally thousands of potential ways that they could build their portfolio rather than 5. Mm-hmm. So it became much, much more complicated for participants. So what happened is a ton of money was spent and providing education, and financial advisors came into the picture to help participants decide how to invest their money. And after a while, it became clear that participants either lacked the level of interest they should have, or certainly lacked the level of knowledge. So online investment advice emerged, and I played a role, without getting into the details, of helping that business to get launched. The idea behind it was that for maybe as little as $10 a year, a participant could get actual direction and advice of how to invest their money. Mm-hmm. So it looked very attractive and appealing. And what happened is the investment community fought that because they didn't want some independent entity telling participants how to invest their money, because it would invest their bottom line. Mm-hmm. And the head of one of the big mutual fund companies told me that. He said, "Look, we're no way I'm going to let some independent entity advise participants and affect our bottom line." So then what happened is, as interest and advice became more popular, and the providers were asked whether they were providing advice, they flipped this thing and started to embrace it. And the reason they did it was they added another layer of fees. So typically they added on top of, let's say, maybe the average 1% they were getting paid, 1 to 2%, they added another percent on top of it.
Wow.
So for many plans, investment costs went up to 2 to 2.5%. And then they went out, and I attended a meeting where one of the large providers, their guy who was out there participating in the meeting, told the investment advisors, "Hey, here's a way for you to make another 0.25% in addition to what you're already making if you add our investment advice."
Man, so yeah, wow.
So this then is kind of a long answer to why in the world did I say I would blow this investment structure up and start over again? What happened next after we got these products in place was they didn't get utilized the way they should have by participants, because they were offered as, hey, it's available. If you want to utilize the advice, here it is. You can use it. But hey, only about typically 10 to 20% of participants would do that. Those that were less knowledgeable and needed help the most, typically didn't go anywhere near it. So then what happened? We had a new type of fund that was introduced called the Target Maturity or Target Retirement Funds, the ones that are labeled 220, 225, 230, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind them is what they did was they packaged the investments in a way so that participants, all they had to do was pick a fund that was going to line up with when they intended to retire, such as 2040. That's all they needed to do was say, here's an answer that if you pick this, you'll get the investment mix that basically makes sense for you. And so I embraced that and certainly started to support that idea in a big way. And, those funds really took off and are, continuing to grow in a big way. And the nice thing, about those funds is if it's done right, is, they can be purchased for as little as 0.15% or less.
Oh, wow.
Maybe with a bit of add-on fees on top of it. So what happened, what caused me to make the comment about blowing up and starting over was I had taken a plan that had $100 million in assets in it, and had the typical structure, with 13 or 14 different funds. I went to that employer and said, how about if we eliminate all this nonsense, make it easier for your participants, that what we do is we replace that with target maturity funds. They're going to cost them, instead of 0.75% a year that they're paying now, will cost them only 0.15%, and they don't have to worry about how to make their investments. And so this employer agreed to do that, Travis, and so we changed the plan so that everybody's money was put into these types of funds automatically. Mm-hmm. So rather than them having to decide how to invest, they were automatically put in these funds. Now, we also gave participants the opportunity, if they still wanted to do it themselves, that they can pick from any mutual fund that they wanted to. We didn't limit it to 14 or 15. We said, you got hundreds of them available. If you want to put the time in and you think you're smart enough to do it on your own, hey, you have unlimited opportunity to do that.
Oh.
So what happened is over 90% of the participants, choose to leave the money in the target maturity funds, and said, hey, look, this is a heck of a lot easier than trying to figure it out on our own. So when I did that interview, that's what I was referring to. I was saying, hey, if we didn't have that kind of tool available back in 1980, mm-hmm. and that was when I made the comment of, we're starting over today. The way I would have done it was, rather than having participants make their own picks, I would have structured plans to automatically put participants into this type of investment where they didn't have to try and learn about, large cap, small cap, emerging markets, and, all the other stuff they're, supposed to try and learn to make decent investment decisions. So, that's the way I would have done it, starting over from scratch.
Okay, I see. So that makes sense. But I mean, there would have been really no way for you to know, back in 1979 or 80 that it would have gotten this complicated, really, would there have been?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay, wow.
What happened, and basically the way I label it in the book is, ultimately the investment community hijacked this. They're making much too much money.
Right.
And, we have, mentioned Fidelity as an example. Their own employees have sued them in one, over how their investments are structured in their own plan. Right. And that's happened with other providers too, where participants sued and, have won major concessions.
Man.
I'll tell you a story. Just to really get down to, applying this at the basic level. A couple of years ago, I tackled, over half the workforce doesn't have any retirement plan available at the workplace.
Wow.
And so a couple of years ago, I focused on, how can we help small employers? And I put together a guide. It's available on my website. It's titled Set Up Your Own 401k, with a subtitle of And Save a Lot of Money. And it contains 3 designs that small employers can set up that have no fees to set up or to administrate, and can cost their participants as little as 0.10% a year or whatever.
Wow.
And the reason I'm bringing this up is I was finishing the guide. I had a small employer locally here who asked me if I could look at their 401k plan. I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And I went in and, they were unhappy with their service provider. Employer was paying $1,500 plus a year. And, there were only 8 employees. Participants were paying 2.75%.
Wow.
Outrageous. 2.75% is absurd. Mm-hmm. So I told him, I gave him one of my guides, and I said, hey, look, Model 3 here is clearly what you should do. Go ahead, replace what you've got with Model 3. The finance person, held off on this for a while, and finally, after a couple months, she followed through on it. And so I visited with her afterwards. I said, well, how'd this go? And she said, well, first of all, it was a lot easier than I expected. I thought it'd be a lot harder. But, this eliminated all the employer fees, no employer fees now. Cost to participants went from 2.75% to 0.15. Phenomenal difference.
Yeah.
And, so that's how bad this is. A lot of small employers are just paying much more than what they should. And, the tragic thing, that kind of difference can mean, 5 to maybe as much as 10 years of different additional income, in retirement. Many participants are concerned about having enough, and you eliminate that much in excess fees. Why it clearly can mean additional 5 to 10 years of payout during retirement.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy how much fees make a difference like that. When you say 5 to 10 years, that's just incredible. Something that people definitely should be looking into. And that's very cool that that you're helping small employers who can, help their employees, because that's a lot too. Because, we're talking about the larger companies and stuff, but yeah, a lot of smaller employers where they can help their employees is very important. So that's really cool that you offer that. And just real quick, we'll mention this again, but your website is 401kbenna.com, correct?
Correct. Yeah, and the guide's $18.99, and many small employers, Travis, are sold 401k, and it's the wrong type of plan. Anybody, the father of 401k is a guy you wouldn't expect to say that, but it's definitely the wrong plan for many small employers. It's too complicated, too expensive. liability exposure that they can avoid by using one of these alternatives. And another plus with these alternatives is it's a lot easier when employees terminate. And that's an issue for many small employers. When employees terminate with a 401k, there's a lot of paperwork you have to give them, explaining their options. And, they legally have the right to even leave their money in the plan if they have more than $5,000 in it. And, you have some significant number of employees that do that. And the employer then has a burden, to provide a lot of information ongoing constantly to those former employees. It's a headache for them.
Mm-hmm.
With these designs I have in the guide, when an employee leaves, you just say goodbye to them. The account they have is theirs; they own it. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah, that's not something that I would have ever really thought about. And hearing you talk about it, where just the practicality of something where you have to keep in contact and keep updating, and the paperwork and everything, you really have to think about all that kind of stuff as additional expenses and time and everything, and then even just with educating people, like how much time and effort that takes too. So it is interesting to hear that, because it's a side that's obviously there, but I just wouldn't think about it in structuring these things, but it totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into it; it gets too involved here. But 401k has, I'll just mention quick. There are two things you have to comply with. One of them is called top heavy,
mm-hmm.
and the other one is non-discrimination test. And both of those are very complicated issues for small employers, to have to deal in terms of compliance. And frankly, they're often ignored when you got financial people out there selling these plans. And one of the things that's troubling, to keep an eye on. Last fall, there was legislation introduced by, I think it's Congressman Neal, if I remember right, from Massachusetts, who's chairman of the Finance Committee in the House. And one of the things that legislation would have required was employers to offer a retirement program. And I just read last week that they're now modifying that, which is something I've recommended. I actually contacted their staffer about this, and that small employers that don't offer a retirement program, if they have 10 or more employees, should be all required to offer at least a payroll deduction IRA plan. And unfortunately, I read that the bill that they're going to introduce again this summer is apparently going to require those employers to adopt a 401k plan. And that was troubling to me, because it's the wrong type of plan for many of them. And I was disappointed to see that they're heading in that direction. And I'm sure, frankly, that's coming because of financial pressure they're getting from, some of the financial community. That's what they need to do.
Okay, man. Okay, so just to jump back real quick, you talked about target maturity funds, that's kind of like the prepackaged kind of thing where you just pick the date that you're going to retire at.
Correct.
Okay. And so that's for, would that be for larger companies who are offering the 401k?
It's any size, Travis.
Okay.
Most of these plans, now offer those funds, they're included in them. And, since you brought them up, let me just talk a little bit about them. For people who are in their 30s, 40s, and in early 50s, they clearly are a good option. If you're not going to put the time into really studying how to manage your money, they provide a good mix. They automatically rebalance, which means as the stock market and bonds shift around, they keep the ratio in balance automatic for you. And they also, reduce your risk exposure as you get older by reducing the level of stock and put more emphasis on bonds. However, I do want to comment on the fact that for people who are closer to retirement and already retired, I have a big concern about having your money in these type of funds or in others that are recommended by the investment professionals that have the mix of stock and bonds that are used industry wide. And I have the reason I have a lot of concern is most people who are retired or close to retirement, frankly, can afford the level of risk that they're placed in, with this type of answer. Mm-hmm. And I've worked through that and given examples in the last part of the book that I have out there. Here's the problem. Back in 2007 and 8, this type of fund and others, were called managed account or however you got there, lost close to 30% in value. For those people who are retired or close to retirement.
Oh, man.
And so if you're retired, and especially if you just retired, you can't afford that kind of loss.
Yeah.
You can't afford it. And what the investment people tell them, and I've heard them do this, is, well, don't worry, it'll come back. Just hang in there. Don't panic. Mm-hmm. And so now they tell them, see, came back and look at what the market is. You did really well, but they didn't. And let me explain why. And I documented this in the book. I ran and compared where a retiree would be who took this approach if they retired in 2003, compared to what they're told when they retire. And that is, hey, look, assume you're going to get a 6% return, with this kind of investment, and you're going to be in great shape. And when you run the numbers, which I've done in the book historically, at the end of 2008, you had much far less than what you would have with a 6% return. And this is weird because, those funds over that stretch average better than a 6% return. So, an advisor would say, well, look, you've gotten better than a 6% return, so you're great. But here, the problem is when you are investing new money and you're drawing out and you get a 30% loss, you now have to start selling more shares to withdraw the amount that you need. So, if your plan's $1,000 a month of income that you're drawing out, and it drops 30%, you have to sell more shares now.
Okay.
What was planned, and you're never going to recover.
Right.
You're never going to recover. An example I use first I have in the book is assuming you retired in 2003, and from 2003 to 2008, things were pretty good. So then I took an example and said, well, suppose you retired in 2008. In the first year you retired, it dropped 30%. You're never going to recover. I mean, you're buried. Mm-hmm. And why I'm concerned now and talking about this, Travis, is I definitely feel that the stock market at some point we're going to hit another 2007, 8. I don't know when. I'm not a prophet, but we've always had bear markets. And, I don't think we've gotten to a point where, all of a sudden now we're going to go for another 10, 20 years and, not have a period where the market gets hammered again. Mm-hmm. And the bond market is risky now, generally. It's not likely to be a great place to be over the next 5 to 10 years because most people don't realize it, but when interest rates rise, bond prices drop. And, we're more likely to be in a situation where interest rates will be rising over the next 5 to 10 years than dropping. Mm-hmm. So therefore, bonds aren't really a good place to be right now either.
I see.
So it's important. My opinion. Uh, Most people who are retired or close to retirement don't have millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
They have much more limited amounts, and they need to be concerned about protecting that amount and hopefully having it stretch over their lifetime.
Yeah.
And they can't afford to be in something that's likely to give them a 25-30% loss, sometime over the next 5 years or so. Just can't afford it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So that's very good to know. So that's just kind of your, we don't know when it's going to come or whatever, but just, following it's likely that it will come within the next 5 years or so. So so to just be aware of that, and you give, kind of specific advice for that in your book and everything, correct?
Yeah, and I've laid it out, going back and kind of mathematically run through the numbers, say, hey, look, this is what it looks like, and we've been in a period now where we're 10 years plus of a favorable stock market, and it's the longest in history, so keeping it going for another 5 years or more would certainly be historically, unusual. Never happened.
Mm-hmm. Man, well, this is great, Ted, that you're sharing this information. It's so interesting to hear, and I love to hear your perspective on it, especially how you've kind of you started this whole thing, kind of, and went through it all and have seen it all, and now you're telling us what we should do and kind of look out for. So I really appreciate it and love hearing from you. And one thing I wanted to ask you about too was if you had ever tried to kind of copy or patent right your 401k finding.
Yeah, actually, I think I mentioned earlier that we did, and I learned a couple of things. I was only 39 at the time, so I wasn't smart enough at that time to learn that if you get no answer from an attorney, you look for a new attorney. And the other thing I learned is that I asked an attorney who's an expert in retirement law rather than patent and copyright, and that was the wrong thing to do also. Oh. But anyhow, I was interviewed on NPR quite a few years ago and gave that answer when I was asked, and I don't know, it just came to mind. I said off the top of my head, it would be all right if each participant sent me a quarter. Everybody who was a participant in the 401k plan.
Yeah.
At the time, there were probably about 40 million of them.
Sounds good.
I got off, the interview. About a week later, I went out and picked the mail out of the box, and it was a little heavier than normal. And I, slid the envelopes, and could tell there were quarters sliding around. So two of the envelopes actually had quarters in them, and one of them had a 25-cent check. So somehow those people actually tracked down my address, and did that. And by the way, I still have the 25-cent quarter from somebody in Ohio. So.
Nice. That's awesome. I love that people did that. That's hilarious. And I like the 25-cent check too. That's fun.
Yeah. Hey, there's one thing else that I covered in the book that we haven't talked about, and that's the pension system. There's first of all, there's really a misconception out there, and there's a widely held myth. Just to start discussion on this, Travis, that we once had a wonderful retirement plan program where everybody retired at retirement and they got a pension for life. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard that?
Oh yeah.
And it happened during the last presidential election. And by the way, I'm not politically happy with anyone. So the fact I'm going to mention that then President Obama and Bernie Sanders, made these comments during their campaign about, hey, we need to get back to the good old days where everybody had a pension. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm in favor of the other party. Okay, so pretty unhappy with both of them.
Right.
But let me tell you about the good old days. 1960, I started in the home office of Provident Mutual in Philadelphia. They had a pension plan. And to become a participant in it, you had to be 30 if you were a male. You had to be 35 if you were female. And that usually gets some reaction from females when I say that. But the other part of it was you had to stay until you were age 60 until you got a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
If you left before that, you got nothing. Zippo.
Man.
And that was true of pension plans, okay? In companies, some companies were notorious for getting rid of employees, as they were approaching that point where they would have what's known as a vested benefit.
Right.
And another thing is that when businesses went under at that point, if their plan was underfunded, there wasn't any safety net. Many retirees and people who spent 20, 30 years working lost a major part of their pension. Some lost all. And, that was dealt with a bit when ERISA was passed in 1974 and Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation was put in place that improved that situation. But also, Travis, there were never more than 30% of the private workforce covered by a pension plan.
Huh.
Never more than 30%.
Wow.
So this idea that everybody had a pension is it's a myth.
Yeah.
If you work for a large employer, you probably had one, but most small companies didn't have pension programs. I mean, it was not likely at all.
Right.
So that's some historical background. But let me get to the point I want to make here for people today here that I've covered in the book, and that is the fact that participants in pension plans, and by the way, I started in that side of the business. I used to sell and administer pension plans. We did that in our business that we were in.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, explaining why I've covered it in the book, it became impossible to sell pension plans after 1974. Nobody would go into them. So I had to shift gears. But the problem here, the fundamental problem we have that's systemic, is regardless of whether it's the federal government with Social Security, whether it's state or local governments or private employers, all of these entities have been allowed to make pension promises that they haven't properly funded. And as a result of that, participants in pension plans have as much risk as they do in a plan like a 401k. They just don't know it. They're not aware of. So they don't have the level of security that they think they do. And, I pointed out a number of reasons in the book. If you're in one of these pension plans and have the opportunity to take cash, when you leave, you should seriously think about doing that. And, I've explained why. But one of them is even if you want, let's say you want a guaranteed income for life, and you have the opportunity to take cash, you'll actually have a higher level of financial security if you do that by buying an immediate income annuity from a top quality insurance company. It's been around for 100 years and has a high ranking. Now, there are a lot of bad stuff about annuities.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of bad stuff, but I'm talking about a fixed income one where you get a guaranteed income for life, and have a lot of other funny stuff going on, and you don't have people getting paid a ton of money to sell them. And the reason you have greater financial security in that environment is chances are that you're in a state plan, your local municipal plan or employer plan, that it's underfunded. And I'm sure you've read about this, Travis. I mean, states like Illinois and Pennsylvania, where I am here, and California, and many others. There's some tremendously underfunded governmental plans,
mm-hmm.
and many employer ones as well. So you're part of that system where there aren't enough assets potentially. If you go out into annuity from a top quality insurance company, you have the assets of them. They actually have assets. They actually have hard assets to back these. But in addition, they participate in state insurance funds. If it's a New York state or whatever state, the state has a fund. They're kind of similar to what a bank backing would have with FDIC. If a bank went under, same thing with an insurance fund. Mm-hmm. And well, the difference there is that insurance fund with the state has assets and no liabilities. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, they have assets without liabilities.
Uh-huh.
If you take the private pension system, we have an entity called the PBGC. The insurance quasi-government insurance agency that pays when steel workers, when airlines, et cetera, go out of business. They step in and guarantee pension benefits. Okay. Pension Benefit Guarantee Corp. Well, the problem with them is they have a lot more liability than what they have assets. Mm. So you're in a system that is in the red. And to take a specific example right now is one of the systems that they guarantee benefit for are multi-employer union pension plans. One of those is the Central State Teamsters. Central State Teamsters, when President Obama was still in office, trustees of that got Congress to pass legislation to reduce the benefits to retirees by 40% or so because they were going to run out of money. Whew. President Obama surprisingly signed that legislation. That legislation is still being fought in court. Mm-hmm. Yet efforts are being made by the trustees of that system, and frankly, groups that don't want to see these pension cuts to get Congress to bail them out. But that's a specific example here of the issues that's involved. That of why that. Pension benefit guarantee system it doesn't have the assets to back up these benefits long term.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's scary stuff when, people are promised these benefits and then it's really not going to happen,
Well, it's a tragedy. I mean, and it's my concern about this is that the next time, I've been saying for years now in my talks around the country that, it doesn't matter what the retirement system is, whether it's Social Security, whether it's a pension plan, whether it's a 401k or whatever, all of these plans are dependent upon a healthy economy, a robust stock market over the next 10, 20 years or so. Mm-hmm. They all are. And that unfortunately isn't likely to happen.
Right.
So it's the potential is there. If we have another 2007 or 8, that it's not going to be nice.
Man. Yeah, this stuff it's scary to think about. It's important to think about it, and there's a lot on the line, so it can be intimidating for people, but it is extremely important to learn about this stuff and consider that what you were told may not be the truth and may not be happening. So it's great that we have folks like you who are kind of looking at the whole big picture and telling us how it applies to us as individuals.
Yeah, and I don't have an axe to grind on any of this stuff, Travis. I don't have anybody paying me. I don't want anybody's. No one's paying me to promote ideas. I know the reason I'm mentioning that I recently did I was interviewed, extensively for an article that Wall Street Journal writer guy, I've known for many, many years was doing, where he said, "Hey, look, if I want you to tell me if what would be the perfect ideal retirement system, if we could do it. And so I told him, I said, hey, look, I don't even want to talk about that. Reason being, it's not going to happen. First of all, why run down that rabbit hole? Because to take everything, kind of scrap it and start with something else politically isn't going to happen. So what's the point?
Right.
But the reason I'm getting into that is, there's someone out there now who gets a lot of publicity, and I've known her for years, and she has a plan out there of what we need to do is adopt a mandatory defined contribution plan that the government puts in place federally, where employees are required to contribute maybe 2% of pay, and employers as well, and make that mandatory and governed, run by the government. And so there are ideas like that floating around there, but I understand, there's financial backing involved in, promoting those ideas. So I don't have anybody backing mine.
Right.
I'm, I say, hey, look, if 401k gets shot down, it's not going to matter to me. It's not going to end. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. So,
yeah.
So I think, the main thing, and that's what I did with this, guys, I think that, to focus on, hey, what are things we could do to try and improve what we have, and maybe potentially have a shot politically at, making that happen to strengthen what we have in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, that's great to hear that, that you are in that position, and what you're doing and helping out is great. So I truly appreciate it. And, I'm only 25, so this is not a huge, it's not stuff that my friend circle is really talking about. So it's great to hear it from you and talk about this stuff and start to think about it and understand it. So I can definitely appreciate that.
An important thing there, by the way, is the greatest benefit of a 401k, if you have it available, isn't the tax break, and it's not even the match from the employer if you have that. It's the fact that it converts you from a spender into a saver.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it did that for me. The money I put into 401k, I would have never had the discipline to do that on my own. With a young family, 4 kids, and all the financial responsibility you have with that. It wasn't easy. And I had many individuals over the years, including ones that just hit their early 30s, say, "Wow, this is great. I mean, I've got $10,000-$15,000 accumulated that I know I've never done that on my own." And so that's what 401k does, is it converts spenders into savers. And at your age and younger, it's critical to start doing that. And even if it's only 1% of pay, to start, and then look at adding an additional percent every year, to get to a level maybe where you need to be longer term. And hey, Travis, I've been around people, over my years that run the spectrum from billionaires, multimillionaires to totally down and out, and they're spenders and they're savers.
Uh-huh.
I've seen people making what most would consider outrageous amounts of money, certainly up in the top 1%, that don't have anything. They're still barely skipping by, pay to pay. Okay. I've seen individuals making very modest amounts of money that manage to accumulate some significant amounts, because they're thrifty. So the problem, if you aren't saving, is it's always, well, if I just have a little more,
Mm-hmm.
just have a little more. And but it still doesn't happen. Where you get another 5 or 10%. So you gotta start and get in the game early. And I'll just make one last point of that. When you reach retirement, you need a certain sum of money. It's either going to be a minimum of 10 times or more what you're making at that point in time, whatever it might be. You're going to need, 10, 15 times that amount.
Mm-hmm.
And if you start saving earlier, less than half of that will have to come from money you save versus investment income you can earn.
Right.
If you don't get in the game serious about it till you're in your 50s, 75% or 80% is going to have to come from money you take out of your pocket to save versus investment income that you can get.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you're facing.
Right. So start early. It makes sense to do that. And yeah, I found that, it may seem, at least for me personally, it may be like, man, how can I take out, an extra 5% of what I'm making, a year or a month to do that? But it's like, once I implement it, it's really like it's not a difference at all. It's very, easy to do, and it just becomes the new, way of life. Like my lifestyle just changes a little bit, and it doesn't make a difference, and it feels great to know that I am doing that savings and thinking ahead towards the future. It does feel good, and it's very doable once you just kind of make the switch. It's almost inevitable to you just kind of readjust and go with it.
Yeah, and I mean, you obviously need to make enough where you're in the position to do that. I mean, there are many that single moms, barely getting by, etc. But when you're in a position where you have discretionary income and you're buying Starbucks coffee, and you're going out after work for a drink or two, or whatever. I mean, where you're doing things that are by choice, that aren't necessity. You have that opportunity to look at it and say, well, what happens? How do I find $20 a week or whatever? What are the things I'm doing that I can cut back on and get you there?
Mm-hmm. Man, great. Well, this has been awesome, Ted. I love talking to you about this stuff. It's been extremely interesting, and I hope people listening feel the same way. But I know we also wanted to hit on Compassion International, which you're kind of involved with and contribute to. So can you kind of just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been doing fundraising for them through a variety of things, and they're a great organization. They provide support to the most needy children around the world, and so kind of what hit me as a result of something I was getting involved in a couple of years ago, and deciding whether to do it or not. I was led, kind of got the idea that, hey, rather than giving me the quarter, if you've benefited from 401k, to say, hey, look, if you benefited from 401k, consider doing either a one-time gift to Compassion International, or supporting a child or whatever. And at that time they had, in addition to supporting a child each month, they had four projects they had running. Kind of remembering some of them. One of them was helping train youth, young people to become self-sufficient, providing funding to help them maybe start their own businesses, to do that. Clean water for a community that didn't have clean water. Another one was prenatal care for pregnant young ladies who weren't getting any treatment, prior to childbirth, and all the things that go wrong when that happens, providing that level of support. And then I guess the last one was actually early childhood investment and development for kids that were under 5, 6 years old and weren't going to be getting the right level of nourishment to even have a chance at surviving and developing. And so over 80% of their funds go hands on to those type of projects, and so appreciate the opportunity to chat about it.
Wow. Awesome. Cool. And I'll get links to Compassion International and throw that in the show notes so people can click on that and check it out and everything and get involved with that. And you're at 401kbenna.com. That's where we can get the book. Anything else where we should send people?
Yeah, well, the guide's on there. Actually, the book isn't on there. It's at it's at Amazon and other places that market books. So
okay, perfect. And
401k 40 years later.
Right. Okay. Perfect. 401k 40 years later. I'll throw a link to that on Amazon too, so people can get that easy with the 2-day shipping and stuff. But yeah, this is great. I mean, for anyone listening, if this kind of raised any red flags or alerts and kind of what you're doing and what you have, definitely check out Ted's book and, give it a read through for some very specific advice and examples and everything. So yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you being on, Ted. It was very fun to talk to you and very informative. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Travis.
Oh boy, what an episode. Thanks for sticking around and listening to it. This is Travis again, here on my own. But as a thank you for sticking around, I wanted to give you a free sticker, a free Curiosityness sticker, 100% free. Don't have to pay for shipping. You don't have to enter your credit card info. It's really free. To get one, go to curiosityness.com/free sticker, and it's yours. I'll send it to you right away, and you can slap that baby wherever you want to represent Curiosityness. So thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Just wanted to give you guys a little gift. So just go ahead and claim that at curiosityness.com/free sticker. And visit our website too, curiosityness.com. I have an Instagram, Curiosityness Podcast. I'm on Instagram too as Trav DeRose, me, Travis, the host. You can follow me if you want. We're on Twitter, Curiosityness TV is our handle there. We're on Facebook as Curiosityness. All the links to this stuff are in the show notes. You can just click on it and follow us if you want to, because I post some cool little clips and extra stuff that you don't get from the podcast onto social media. So you can join in on that and comment and talk about me and the show or whatever you want to do. We're on YouTube too as Curiosityness. And I have an email address, travis@curiosityness.com. Send me an email. Send me your thoughts on the show, suggestions for new guests, tips on things to make the show better and help me with my interviewing and get better and everything like that. So constructive feedback is always nice. So send me an email. And also reviews super help. Really appreciate reviews on the show in Stitcher or iTunes or Apple Podcasts or whatever. Just drop a review. That's extremely helpful. You don't even have to make it 5 stars. You can lower it. I would prefer a higher one, but whatever you want to do. I won't coax you into something. But any sort of review helps. I really honestly do appreciate it. So, thank you again, guys, for sticking around and listening to this end blabber with me. But have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.